Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Controllers Council and the webinar on Achieving Finance Reinvention, 5 Steps to Real Transformation. We are going to ease into this webinar. I know a number of people are still joining, signing in, coming out of their meeting. So we're going to do some housekeeping, some introductions, lay some groundwork. So like I said, no rush. I know people are still joining and we don't want them to miss the information that's up front. So I think by the time we're at about 3 or 4 minutes past the hour, we'll be getting into the heart of our webinar. So let's do some housekeeping. I assume most of you have attended webinars at some point in the past, especially throughout this pandemic. So the rules are pretty much the same as what you've attended before, although we've got a few new twists for you. We've got some audio and our web troubleshooting problems. We'll try and help you out with that. Use the chat window. You're all on mute. You're not on video. You can sit back and relax. We do ask for questions and participation. So we've got the questions panel or the Q&A button to ask us questions throughout the webinar, any of our speakers. It's anonymous, the participants are not going to see your questions, so go on ahead and jump in. The next point here is an important one. There is a reward or rewards for great questions. So we're looking for that participation. We want to answer the questions that you have, and there's going to be some follow-up afterwards with some nice prizes. I think to spoil it, we are going to give away at least one copy, if not more copies, of the book that this webinar is based on, written by Brian Sommer, our distinguished guest and main speaker here today. So when you get engaged and ask us some questions, we want to give you his book. All right. I will be pausing Brian throughout the webinar a few times to read out loud some of the questions that you've asked and make sure that you get some answered. We'll stack up a few and answer them at the end as well. We're recording this, so we'll be sure to send you a copy of the recording so you can share with others who may have missed it. And there's also a white paper on this topic. So, I don't know, the 7 to 10 page condensed version of what we're going to be learning today. So you can keep that as a handy reference as well and share that with your peers who are looking to figure out business transformation and financial transformation. Now, this is not a webinar for CPE. We're not giving CPE credits, but we do have some polling questions in here, and it's really just for fun. So we can get a sense of who you are as an audience. We can shape some of our discussions to suit you. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. We'll do some introductions. The guy who's been speaking for 3 minutes, that's me, Mark Gervase. I'm Director of Product Marketing at Bill.com. I am a former CPA, former corporate finance guy. I've done a lot in the world of finance, and well, here I am in marketing, so you can connect the dots there. But I've been working in financial technology for, years and years now, despite years and years of also with that finance background, really a split personality. And I'm really passionate about this. I've been working with customers to digitally transform their finance org, their finance operations, their financial processes for years. And across the way, I've come across one of the sharpest minds in this whole universe of finance and business transformation, Brian Sommer. So I'm gonna let Brian introduce himself, and he's got a slide later on some of his credentials. We'll spend a little more time with Brian in a second, but Brian, a brief intro and hello to everybody.
Well, hello, everyone. And as Mark said, I'm Brian Sommer, and I'm known mostly these days as an industry analyst, but I cover all things related to finance and ERP. And yes, I actually did a 2.5-year bit of research on digital transformation. And I'll, for those of you who don't feel like reading a book, I'll give you a couple of the highlights of it here in a few minutes and how it's relevant to the change that finance has to do going forward. But first, let me go back to Mark. Mark, take us on through here the agenda and first polling question.
Will do. Thanks, Brian. That's exactly what we're going to do. is after this, we'll ask you guys a couple of questions. So we're on our housekeeping and introduction. We're going to talk about some key themes in reinvention. Really start at the high level. We're going to look at some economics, right? This is the Controller's Council. Let's look at some of the numbers, break down old versus new technology economics. And then the turn, right, where we reimagine the new future. This is part of any key presentation, anything you've got to keep in your mind if you're going to sell your organization. Reimagining the future and how to do that, how to sell the change, how to make the case to make things better for you, your team, your organization. We'll do a little summary and wrap up. We'll do a little commercial, intro to bill.com. Bear with me. We'll talk a little bit about who we are and how we can help. And throughout, and certainly at the end, we will get to your questions with our answers. All right, so let's go to the next slide. The next slide is really our poll. So we're going to push you guys a question we want to know, a little bit about you. All right. Is that poll working? Oh. Yes, there it is. All right, we'll give everybody a few seconds to fill this out. There's a lot of attendees, so I expect a lot of answers. Let's take a look, everybody. And give it a few more seconds. I think there's some sort of counter, Neil, that lets us know how many have filled it out. Keep going, everybody. Almost there. We do not have enough people voting. Come on, people, let's wake up. I haven't put you to sleep already yet. We're only 7 minutes in. Let's get a few more answers, a few more votes here. There we go. That's working. Don't make me go in. Don't make Brian and I go into our radio DJ show here. All right, good. Thank you. All right, so we've got some quick results. Yeah, there we go. There it is. So we asked you about the impact of the pandemic on your org. Certainly, making work from home work for you has been important. Additional time spent, right? Replanning, reforecasting, that certainly makes sense. We've all been through that. I've got some horror stories that I can share with you on dealing with paper, getting paid and making payments in the remote work world and shifting from the office. So that's good to hear that you're all dealing with some of these big challenges. So thank you for answering that poll. We'll save you from the morning drive time radio DJ schlock that we were about to break into, and let's move on to a couple of more slides, getting into the presentation. Thank you for answering. All right, Brian, I'm going to let you take it from here and take our guests on a journey of financial reinvention.
Thanks, Mark. Actually, that was an interesting polling question, and on the responses, I think the one making work from home actually work for finance is going to be one that hopefully will start going down as more and more companies tend to automate and particularly bring more cloud-based kind of solutions into the picture. So I'm not surprised by the number that was there. That was 42%, but I will think over time that will go down. And anyway, we'll talk about some of these other issues here in just a moment. Next slide. As Mark indicated, I'm Brian Sommer, and I did 18 years with Accenture. I'm a finance person by training, and I come from a family that's knee deep in financial accounting people. I've got a brother who's a CFO, a sister who's a white collar crime expert. I've got nieces and daughters and others who are all in accounting. So this stuff runs pretty deep. Of all the things I've written, though, I got to tell you, some of the most interesting stuff lately has been on the impact of the coronavirus on the workload and productivity of finance and HR, the back office, if you will, of many corporations. And we'll talk a little bit about that because one of the most interesting things was the immediate impact it had on productivity. And I think that's kind of the underlying issue when so many of you indicated that making work from home work for finance was a real challenge. And we'll get into some of the details on that in a second. But again, that was a little bit on me. Let's go to the next slide, and let's talk about what the major themes are going to be here. Number one is it is hard. It truly is to justify replacing old financial accounting software with something more, whatever, commensurate with the times. And it's difficult because some of you are on your like fifth different accounting system by now in the history of your firm, and it's hard to justify some of the changes. I'll talk some more about that in a moment. I also want to talk about what are some of the big productivity trends. I'll get into that in just a second. And we'll talk about some other things on what these radically reimagined processes, what are they going to have to look like and how we make them happen. Next slide. So the pandemic triggered some stuff, but frankly, for a lot of folks, there's a lot of interest in doing one of these kind of finance transformations now, and that interest was there before things started to change so dramatically in Q1 of this year. We'll cover that in a moment, but the key thing is you got to get into a mindset that it's time to make a change. For any of you who believe that nostalgia is a viable strategy, this is going to be a disappointing webinar for you. It is not, and things keep moving, changing, and growing and altering, and your firm and your organization, your financial organization in particular, have to make that move as well. Next slide. So I actually took that picture of a sign out in front of a store not too long ago, and I thought the fact that they had the question mark there was kind of rather eye-catching, to say the least. But productivity is one thing that really got clobbered lately, and it's interesting how companies and governments look at productivity. From a governmental perspective, many governments look at productivity as simply total company revenues divided by the total number of employees. And if the ratio keeps growing over time, then it is assumed that the company is becoming more productive. That is a very imperfect measure. I get the intent, but it's just not altogether right. There's a bunch of other kind of ways of measuring productivity, but the bottom line is it's hard to have a productive business when you've been mandated to close, or you've been mandated to change what products you make to do something else. It's hard to do it when airlines and other kinds of, and borders are closed and you can't get materials in. The work from home stuff was particularly challenging to a number of finance people. But what was interesting about the work from home and the research I did was to see how uneven the work from home challenges were around the globe. And I bet some of you listening in on this webinar have got some interesting stories you can relate and add to this as well. But one of the things I found was that broadband internet access is not as ubiquitous globally as you might think. And while a number of people all over the world have smartphones, billion plus people to be exact, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have broadband internet access in their homes. And there were some other challenges, like, do you really want customer sensitive data or customer identity information be available to someone working remotely in their home? And do you even have all the appropriate software licenses and everything else to make that happen, particularly for those of you still running with on-premises products? There were big problems here. And what we learned to a great extent is that some businesses had to scale dramatically down. If you're in the hotel and the airline industries, you saw your businesses just almost disappear overnight. The restaurant industry faced a lot of this. And when you needed it, you needed relief, from some of your suppliers to cut you a break, whether it was on rent, it was on application software maintenance, whatever. And you may or may not have been able to do that. Some of that depended on the contracts that you had signed, but what you may have found out is that some things just don't scale down very well. And the things that don't scale down, frankly, in the technology space are the ones that rely on you having a very expensive and capital intensive data center, computer hardware, application software, and so forth. But we also saw a lot of people had some cloud contracts that don't scale down, they only scale up. And either way you look at it, there were some problems with the way businesses were structured. They just weren't set up to scale up rapidly or down. And that's going to have to change as well in the future discussions you have with your providers and your suppliers. Next slide. All of this means that productivity, the way we've known it, was something people tracked and monitored, but it was built on a foundation of assumptions. And those assumptions were that things were going to change in a slow, measured fashion. But what I'd like you to ponder is we had a big recession in 2001, and when the dot-com bubble and the Y2K, whatever fiasco did not quite materialize. We had another recession, the Great Recession, that kicked off in late 2008 and 2009. That one was triggered by collateralized debt obligations, among other, instruments. And now we have this one triggered by the coronavirus here in 2020. So in less than 20 years, we've had three big, huge economic swings, highly disruptive and the like. And anyone who thinks that business is going to always be, an economy is going to move in slow, plodding, predictable kind of ways is living in the past. We need a new way of looking at how we run our firms and how we design the processes and the kind of technologies that we use so that we have the ability to not only scale, but to pivot, change, and make ourselves very differently when the time requires it. And throughout all of this, productivity has to be watched because you still need to be productive even when you're going through traumatic, and I use that not dramatic, but traumatic kinds of change. Next slide. So there are some things that really clobber productivity, and I know we know all these. I'm not going to drain them all, but I'm still amazed. I'm a buy-side analyst, and I do a lot of work with clients on selections and software contract negotiations and the like. And when I go visit clients, I'm astonished still to see people preparing things and on paper or printing out a spreadsheet, put it on paper, put it in a file, and then have it forwarded to someone else where it goes in their inbox and it sits and and ages like a fine wine or cheese until it then gets moved along and moved along. There are these long serial processes that folks, these things are just as obsolete as they get. If you've got overly complicated, and I use the word tortured workflows, I see those all the time where I go. I see people operating in facilities and using technology and capital equipment that's way past its most relevant time frame. Frankly, I don't think your shareholders or your customers care that your great grandfather built that original facility you're working in 1907. But I can guarantee you that just because that was the way they did it before, if your great grandfather were still alive today, he'd probably tell you, you need to change, you need to get with the times. And if you have any of these kind of things still going on in your company, you have to ask why. Why are we doing this way? Because it's just a drag on productivity. It makes us unresponsive to our customers and our suppliers, and it makes you really unattractive as an employer, because who wants to work in the accounting department of someplace that's still stuck on paper and tens or hundreds of thousands of spreadsheets? It's not fun, folks. Next slide. So what we need to be thinking about are, what are some of the new economics behind some of the change? Let's go next slide. I've got here on the left a slide, a graphic that shows what happens when you automate a manual process for the first time. And what you get is that light blue part of the arc where you collect a huge amount of incremental benefits. And this is some powerful stuff. And I think all of us have seen this happen, the first time you automate something. But in every subsequent generation of technology that you bring in to re-automate that, you're basically chasing a declining benefits curve, and the marginal benefits you get from one generation of technology to the next keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And I point this out as a cautionary note to you, because when you need to be aware of is, if you try and take a business case to the executive committee or to the board, they fully expect you not to count the benefits that have already been achieved in the past, and trying to find net new ones when you just re-automate a function is a fool's game. I use two words all the time. I talk about packagectomies. That's where you pop out an existing package and pop a new one in. packagectomies generally don't deliver very good ROI stories, if at all. And it's one of the reasons that you hear a lot of vendors who peddle those products, they talk about total cost of ownership. They don't talk about return on investment. And that's a very important difference, but it also is a clue that you may need to be looking elsewhere for real value. The other word I use besides a packagectomy is a re-automation effort. But anyway, they get you to the same point. Let's go to the next slide. So what used to work in the past with accounting technology is that you had stuff that could that not only would last for decades, but the old upgrade cycle on these products was every 2 or 3 years you might have gotten a somewhat material kind of new release that would come out. And a lot of you actually tried to defer doing these upgrades as long as you possibly could. In fact, a number of you probably have accumulated or amassed a significant amount of technical debt, which is these are expenditures you should have been making and to keep your technology current. And if you're still sitting on a bunch of poorly integrated, poorly interfaced, patched work, bubble gummed, highly customized, kind of old tech, I guarantee you got a ton of technical debt there that you need to get rid of at some point. You have to have a plan to get rid of this, because if you don't deal with the sins of the past, if you will, you're never going to be able to re-engineer and reinvent finance and move it forward. So be prepared for that. Some of the other things that used to work, you can read all these. SPOTS, by the way, that stands for software packages on the shelf. I see a lot of companies that had good intentions and they went and licensed or subscribed to a new piece of technology, but they never got around to getting it implemented, amazingly enough, or they overbought the technology and their eyes were as big as their bank account, but they just didn't have whatever the courage, the team, or whatever to actually get the stuff implemented. And what used to work in the past was to justify a new system because of the labor efficiencies or productivity and effectiveness gains that you could create. That's harder to do if all your new system is going to do is just basic plug and chug transaction processing. You got to look beyond that. You got to be looking for more. So a couple other things, if I could add to this list, I would say that do-it-yourself maintenance is a problem. Nowadays, you can get vendors to maintain the applications for you, and clearly that's where you need to go, particularly if you're a company that tends to accumulate technical debt. And you also need to watch out. A lot of folks thought that if the software didn't do it, well, we'll just make a spreadsheet fill in the missing gaps. That used to work. That doesn't work going forward. Next slide. So where the value is today, the red line here that's going from the top left to the bottom right, that's basically the kind of benefits you get from re-automating or doing those packagectomies I refer to. It's a declining benefit curve. The areas where the value comes from doing things like doing a radical reinvention of your finance processes, bringing in some very smart analytics, the kind of analytics that not only predict what a problem is going to be, but even recommend courses of action and may even have workflow and exception handling capabilities built into them. And then you also want to look at things where robotic process automation occurs, where robotic technology analyzes transactions to see if they fit a pattern of a prior transaction. And if so, it will go ahead and recommend that it process it the same way you used to do it in the past. And it avoids a lot of manual work, all of these are designed to improve productivity. And that's really where the fun's at. Let's go to the next slide. And when we do so, let's take a polling question here. Mark, I'll let you kind of tee it up because I'm going to get another big slug of Dr. Pepper here.
All right. Thanks, Brian. All right, everybody. Another polling question for you. I'd love to see y'all jump in and start voting. Take a look at this question. How do you define finance reinvention? Is it upgrading your software? Is it integrating spreadsheets that you've had throughout the organization? Adding new tech around the edges, keeping the core the same? Are you integrating big data, dark data? Are you doing a big data project? Are you trying to do this with more of a customer and partner focus? No right or wrong answer. There's many different ways to define reinventing finance within your org or personally, but we'd love to get your opinion on this. Let's get a few more seconds here, give more people a chance to read and vote. Come on, come on. Almost there. Come on, everybody, we're almost there. I want to get at least.
Tell you, Mark, you sound like you're calling a horse race, and we've got accountant in the lead, followed by CPA in second, trailing behind by 3 links. Is
coming down the straightaway. It's gonna be a photo finish. The jockeys are up. Yeah. Good. All right. I think we can close in a few more seconds. We got just about everybody who voted there, and that makes for a really good sample. All right, Brian, what do you think here? We've got a pretty big majority looking at the last answer here.
Yeah, that's interesting because, well, I'll tell you what, I really didn't expect anybody to say upgrading or integrating, the top 2 answers. I knew those were going to be low. I did think there'd probably be a little bit more on the dark data, big data, and so forth, because that's a big frontier where people are pulling more operational kind of information. And with all the new scenario planning and forecasting demands that have been put on organizations this year, I would have thought that might have popped up a little higher. In fact, I talked to the CEO of a major company just the other day, and he commented that they used to go from doing a small quarterly planning update 4 times a year, and then once a year they would have one monster one where they would do it for the year to come, the big annual forecast and plan. Now he says they do that 2 or 3 times a week. So the amount of like planning and the use of all this other data and signal information is growing in importance. But this thing about actually better serving customers, partners, that also can include employees, regulators, and others. It's been interesting to me to see how much work finance people have had to do along with HR people in like producing documentation for like the PPP loans under the CARES Act, and even working together to find out how they get them, some of those loans actually forgiven. So that's all important stuff. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Those are good answers, by the way, folks.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Brian, let's pause here. Actually, I did get a question in, and I know you're getting to it, but we might as well, you could either answer it now or get to it in the slides, but I'm paraphrasing here a little bit. Essentially, I'm too busy, right? My team's working around the clock these days with all that we're being asked to do. How do you even begin to think about researching and learning about what else we might need, and then go about trying to make that sale internal? I think that hopefully that was essentially paraphrasing the question. Maybe I am overemphasized to how busy we are, but how do you get started when you're kind of overwhelmed with the amount of work that is being put on controllers these days?
So when I was writing, good question, and kudos to whoever came up with that one. That actually is a really good question to put out there. When I did all that research on digital transformation, what struck me were how many digital misfires I ran into as opposed to successful digital transformations. And I didn't want to write a downer of a book. I just kept plugging at it until I kept finding enough of the success stories to figure out what really made the difference. What was different between those and the ones that didn't work? And what I found is there were a lot of people that committed 1 of 2 things, mistakes. They either cut corners or they tried to skip steps. And in the cutting corners, I get it. Everybody's got those same problems. Your headcount, particularly the back office, has been cut to the bone. It's been that way for a couple of decades now. Who's got the time to do that is probably one of the biggest issues and questions out there. The feedback I got on that was so strong that I ended up adding a whole back end on the book that was around starting one of these efforts. Because as it turns out, you can get a lot of people to salute the concept. It's really hard to actually get the thing kicked off and going. I could probably do a whole webinar just on that alone, but suffice to say, you're going to need some help, and you got to have some political capital to have any chance of making it a success. and you're going to have to do the homework. And one of the things that I found to be the most successful technique is if you can start just even very small, doing some initial research and find some examples of things that are really working well for some companies. They don't even have to be in your industry. If you could, whether it's organizing some brown bag lunches or what have you, get others in your firm to come with you on some of those little trips or journeys, whatever, to see what is the art of the possible. In some cases, when I knew we were getting closer to actually coming up with a compelling vision of what the future environment's going to look like, I actually made it not a negotiable item. I made it a requirement that the top execs of this company come with me to Silicon Valley. We walked them all around to the home offices of several major software companies in 2 days so they could get out of the office, get some fresh air, and actually see what's really been going on in this world. And when they came back to the one, they were changed people. And I love that because when they came back and held an all hands staff meeting with their finance team, there was no question. I didn't speak. I didn't say a word in that meeting. This was the day after everyone came back. But the chief operating officer got up there and he started explaining, not only what vendors they saw and he talked about what he liked and what he didn't like, but he made a comment about, and if anybody dares to come in my office going forward and wants to build or buy anything custom going forward, well, we're going to have an uncomfortable conversation. I didn't tell him to say that. He just said that because he noticed everything out there in Silicon Valley had been going the cloud for the last decade. What I'm pointing out is it is probably the road trip is probably the coolest and most powerful change agent that you can make happen for your executives. And again, I don't want to belabor this one answer here, but if you want to talk some more about it, I know my contact stuff's in the back end of this deck, and I'll be happy to talk to you offline about how you do one of those, how you make one of those possible. But it is spectacularly effective. Anyway, let's get on with the
Good. Thanks,
Reinvention.
Brian. Yeah, time check. We're about halfway. I want to make sure we get enough time for the rest of your content. We did get a good comment after that question, which is, given the improved tools that we now have, why should we be too busy? So I think that's a fair point. Not everybody's in the same boat, and I think we're going to get to some of that in the second half, is where you want to be. So thanks for that comment.
Yep, and I would agree with you guys. I'm just thrilled that you're on the call, given how busy everybody is. Period. So thank you for that. I recognize how important your time is, but all right, let's keep going. Let's try the next slide. Let's talk about what the future is all about. So what I learned is, this looks overly simplified, but I'm already told you that the start phase turns out to be one of the most difficult going. I'm not going to say any more on that. But what you have to do is as an organization is you have to see. Let's start there. See what is the art of the possible. You've got to get out there and kick tires, turn over rocks, and find out what's really going on out there. Now, there's this tendency in a lot of companies to call your old like ERP vendor that you picked up 20 odd years ago, and or maybe your old systems integrator that you used 20 years ago. And if I could paraphrase, I think it was Dear Abby that once said, um, sometimes you need to seek true love elsewhere. If you're going to get some interesting perspectives, see new kinds of products and everything else, you need to look around. And the vendors and implementers that may have helped you get to the point you're at today may not be the ones who can carry you forward for the next 20 years to come. The reason you need to do this is to become cosmopolitan, which means to become very aware of your own environment. You need to know what your competition's got or what they could get. You need to think about like how we could be a different kind of entity and what are the requirements for that? Because if the last time you seriously bought or changed some of this technology was 20 odd years ago, trust me, things have changed a lot. And maybe in accounting, you don't notice those changes much because you guys are on such a almost a predefined and somewhat rigid calendar. If it's the second Tuesday of the accounting period, we must get ready to start closing the prior month's books. And then we've got the audits, the internal audit, the external audits, the bank issues and everything else you got to cover. I get it. Your time's pretty much spoken for, but you have to do this work. This is something you can't cut short. And you can't really outsource it either. You can't call up your favorite implementer and expect that they're just going to drop something in your hands and you're going to be super delighted with it because you don't know why they're recommending what they do. That's why you need to go do this yourself. The next thing is think. And the think phase is where uh, you're going to put all the stuff you saw and organize it around what is it that we want? How would we design our processes? How would we change our operations? How would we change the way we interact with customers and suppliers? Are we going to put everything now available on a smartphone when everything used to be kind of on-prem and had to go through a green screen kind of world to do it? Uh, you know, think about, will the new technology use a lot of algorithms, and do we have the skills and the people that actually understand how this stuff works? There's a lot you need to ponder, and coming out of that, you're going to come up with a plan, a scheme, if you will, for what you ideally might want to do. From that, you're going to go move into the reconciliation phase, where you have to reconcile your grand vision with what your company can realistically get done based on the kind of resources you have, whether those are people, technology, capital, what have you. You got to make it realistic, and it's something that you can get done in the time you have available to you. And then finally, you actually get on with the transformation itself. Those are the 5 main phases, and I'm just going to say an extra word or two on each one of them. So let's go to the next slide real quick. This is C. This is how you get, this is why it's important to become very cosmopolitan. And I find it really, I find it really cool to constantly, be I'm in the kind of business where I'm paid to basically keep checking out everything that's coming around the corner. And it always, it's always so amazing to watch clients light up and see things for the first time that they didn't know were possible. But more importantly, I even learned a few new tricks from my clients when they start using things in ways I never even dreamed possible. So it's a great deal, and everyone needs to learn from this. Let's go to the next slide. One of the other things you have to do in the C deal is you need to document what you're doing today. And what you're going to find is that a lot of the way you do things and the way your processes are designed is that they are not done very efficiently, very effectively, or anything else. I'll show you one real quick here on accounts payable in a second. What you have to do is think about where are the opportunity areas we really need to focus in on, and why are we going to change those? And if you can, you want to make sure you get some competitive benchmarks, and you want to look for all kinds of opportunities to change, if you will, the form factor. Why are we doing things on, whether it's a desktop in the office? Can we do it on a smartphone? Can we do it or can the customer do it themselves? Can the employee do it themselves? That's not even in finance. How do we do all that? And what you're looking for is finding things that are going to create the opportunity for all new kinds of business opportunities and improve productivity. Don't let productivity be the only driver, though. You need to be thinking about, how do we create a more flexible, scalable, dynamic kind of in business environment for our back office, no matter which direction the company might flex or pivot and change the way it wants to operate. Next slide. So I'll give you, as a teaser here, let's talk about paying bills. When let's go ahead and just hit the tab button, I think about 4 times. That's it right there. When my dad would pay a bill, he always reached in his wallet and he always paid cash. When when I pay bills, almost always it's a credit card. When my wife pays bills, because she does a lot of online shopping, most of those are paid through PayPal. My daughter, I know, is only on online banking. I don't know that she's ever been into a bank branch in her life. And my son, I know he's paying bills. He's a college graduate and everything else. I just have no idea what he's using these days. I mean, it's just out there. And the reason I tell you this is because businesses, for the most part, have only been paying bills 1 or 2 ways for decades, if not hundreds of years. And if payment processing has changed on the consumer side as dramatically as it has, you can imagine what's going on in the corporate world. So let's go next slide. And what I want to show you is one of the more powerful tools you can do is try and look at your workflow of how a process happens in your company. And this is just an example. And I'm showing you, starting with the bottom left, if a buyer wants to get something from your firm, they're going to generate a purchase order and they might mail it to you, their supplier, and it's going to go through the US Postal Service. Maybe you've made that electronic, so maybe that 2-day plus kind of delay in mailing could be reduced to just seconds or sub-seconds. But if you look across the page here and you look at all of the time that's lost, you realize, like, my God, we're not a very efficient firm. You may have technology and you may have a process that optimize things within one of the boxes, but the real opportunity for a lot of companies, excuse me, is in all of the handshakes going back and forth between many of the different kind of steps along the way. The problem with the way many of you and your IT group possibly have designed processes and workflows in the past is that you didn't show all of the actors that are involved. You would design the piece of the process that maybe resided only within finance, and that missed the whole deal about, what else is going on, with the suppliers, the shippers, and everyone else. When in reality, the value to the company is based on collapsing this time, cutting out all the inefficiency, getting rid of all the needless kind of hand holding, I guess, that's going on, and you want to replace that out. You want to get rid of that. I point this out to you because the time is still the problem. And more importantly, there's a whole bunch of other constituents that need to be considered when you're looking at your processes. Where's the government in this, regulators, where are the bankers, where are your employees, and where's the safety folks? There's a ton of stuff in this case, maybe it's truckers and other kinds of shipment firms, logistics companies. All of that kind of stuff needs to be considered, and you have to find out, what are we doing to really cut through all this in the most efficient manner possible and reduce the total amount of lapse time. Next slide. So when you do that, hopefully you can identify a ton of process improvements, whether those are reductions in technical debt, which I've talked about before, but you really want to get rid of a lot of the accounting workload. And you need to make that a high priority item, that third bullet point. And the reason being is, I can guarantee you, when you think about these new changes, and I'm not trying to trigger a bunch of new questions here, but the leadership of your firm is probably not going to let you hire a bunch of additional people for a reimagined finance group. Instead, you're going to have to find a way to either repurpose the people you have and retrain them, or you may have to get different people. And that means you've got to move folks away from transaction processing and get them into more advanced things like decision making and process design and workflow management and interacting with chat bots and other kinds of smart bots. That's the stuff that drives speed, productivity gains, and competitive advantage. Those are the things that people need to be working on, not basic debits and credits. You need to make that an exception activity, not an everyday thing. Next slide. So when you look at designing the new way you want things to work, you should have a checklist of all the new kinds of technologies going on out there and ask, do any of these have a role in the new way that you want to operate and work and see this process happen? In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all these. Most of these probably already. But you need to have a long list of these, and you need to think about it as a good cross-reference tool and a training technique, I guess, to make sure, or design technique, make sure that you're putting the best thinking forward in how you really want to operate long-term. Next slide. And along with that, there are some other kind of productivity gains. You can see things like lower bank costs. Can you bypass some of the bank, activities and reduce the charges that your firm has to pay for that? How can you do more work remotely? How do you reduce some of your reconciliation cost and effort? I mean, we can go on and on here. You'll have access to these slides. These are just some of the additional kind of productivity gain areas that you need to look at as you think about reinventing finance. Let's do one more polling question here, and we'll get to kind of wrapping up my points. But on this one, I just want to say, oh, I'm sorry. I did want to talk about how you sell this case. I'm sorry. And all I want to tell you folks is this is where you do the reconcile piece. This is where you have to actually figure out what's viable and what'll make it happen for you. If you go into top management, talk about how you're going to change all kinds of, be more efficient, productive, and you're just talking about a simple packagectomy, you lose all credibility with them because they know you're not going to deliver that. So you have to think differently and come up with a different kind of business case than you've ever done before that contains a lot of additional new kinds of value seeking methods. Next slide. So when you do that, you also want to be able to create a compelling kind of vision for where you're going to go. I like to call it the afterlife story. This is what your company and what your organization is going to look like, operate, and how it's going to deliver value to the company after it's got a fully implemented version of all the new kinds of things you're working on. If you can tell that story, and you need to design your basically, I call it your sales kit, your pitch deck, if you will, to cover that, then I think your odds of winning on this go way, way, way up. When you do it, take a page from an old consultant kind of guy like me. Always walk in with three choices. You give one that's the stripped down bare bones version, one that's the Cadillac version, and one smack dab in between. And then you let the executives kind of pick something from columns A and C to kind of change up the thing. And when they start doing that, then you know they've bought into the idea of the change and they just want to tailor it a little bit along with some of their suggestions. So with that, that's how some of the quick tips on selling it. Let's go to the next slide. I think that's our last polling question. Yep. Mark, you want to tee that up real fast?
Sure. Thanks again, Brian. All right, everybody. Let's draw your attention to the polling question again. This is about learning and understanding who can give you the best guidance and insights on transformation. So you're here, you're interested in this topic. Who do you trust? Who do you get the best guidance from? Is it your current vendors? Is it somebody new, new vendor, new consultant? Do you go and do it all yourself? Trust yourself in your own work? Do you go out and ask your peers? Do you look to some of the big industry analysts like Gartner, Forrester, and IDC? I think in reality, you probably want to check a few of these boxes, but we're gonna force you to choose one. And we're getting that voting counter up there. I don't even have to go into my horse race voice here. Thank you everyone for participating. We'll give you a few more seconds on this one. All right, very good. That was about a minute. All right, I think we can close this poll and look at the answers while we're teeing this up. Hey, Brian, one of the questions that came in is, well, just read it. You mentioned RPA. With RPA and AI being claimed to be in many new applications, what is the reality? Kind of a big question, but a fair one.
Yeah. A lot of folks have it and sell it, and it is kind of an uneven market. I know some of my peers, other industry analysts, they're not as bullish on some of the vendors, but I think if you do your right due diligence and you apply it to the right kind of process area, and if you're the kind of company that just has tons, let's say, of highly repeatable, very similar accounts payable invoices, that's a great candidate for RPA, and you owe it to your firm to go check it out. Where it's mature, it's very mature. Where it's still got some rough spots, it still needs some help. So, it's not as bulletproof maybe as what an ERP package is. But then again, ERP products have been around for 40 odd years. Okay, let's go to, on these slides. checking in with peers and the industry analysts and doing your own homework, I wouldn't disagree with any of those three. And I think those are all good places to go. Just watch out with the herd mentality. I know it takes courage sometimes to do something different than others in your industry. So don't be afraid to be a little different there. I mean, certainly check in with your peers, but again, be prepared to seek true love elsewhere. Take some chances. All right. Let me close up with a couple of quick comments. Let's go, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Great.
I just want to make sure that you guys, you need to make sure that you come up with a great business case that aligns strategically with where you want to take the company. And again, I made the comment about nostalgia, and but Brian, that's the way we always do it. Those are not good strategies. Those are fallback adages that don't add any value and are not relevant anymore. We talked about you need to define the journey first, and then you go sell the change. Don't just start getting everybody all excited about, we're going to reinvent finance, and you have no idea what it's going to be, what it's going to look like. You need to do the homework. You need to take the steps and do them in order. And again, remember some of the comments I made about the business case. It's got to work for all levels and all kinds of companies. And what I want to point out for those of you on the call, if your company was particularly hard hit by the pandemic, you may be borderline dysfunctional right now, and your first priority is to get finance back to a highly functioning state. If you're already functional, your next priority is to get it into a process excellent kind of shape. And if you're already killing it with everything in the first quartile, then I encourage you to start thinking about what you can do to transform your operations and your processes in a dramatic way. And then finally, you can think about the last evolution is, how do we actually impact and rewrite the rules of competition in our industry? So those are my remarks. I'm going to flip it back over to Mark. Mark, I think you want to say a couple words about Bill.com.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. If you guys want to get in touch with Brian, how did your email get covered up here, Brian? What happened? I don't know, some weird slide error.
I didn't do it, but anyway, it's just Brian at TechVentive.com. Anyway, keep going. Oh.
All right. Yeah, we'll get to some questions in a second here. There's some good ones, but let's go to the next slide. One more. I just want to introduce Bill.com to you guys because we've talked so much about finance reinvention. And that's really what Bill.com is all about, is taking AP and AR processes and really leading you through a very simple way to automate a very important business process. And we are very experienced at working with companies from small to large on transforming their processes. We partner with leading softwares. We partner with 80% of the top 100 accounting firms in the US. It's like our 4 out of 5 dentists type of stat, and some of the top banks as well. We move a lot of money, and we help millions get paid. Next slide. And the way we do that is we take a very complex process, AP, right? One of the comments that was made in the Q&A is about AP, and really some good advice. So I'll read that for a second to you guys. As far as suggesting an optimal payment process, right? Asking 5 questions, right? Before you make the payment. Did we order it? Did we receive it? Do we have appropriate documentation? Have payment terms elapsed? And is there money in the bank? So, great set of questions to ask yourself. And this is from one of the participants on the call. But I think one of the ways you can ensure that you're answering yes to those 5 questions before you're making a payment is to use a tool like Bill.com to capture all of the information in one place: purchase orders, invoices, having AI scan through all of that information and identify duplicates, and identify the right information from each bill that you need to have, and then go through and make sure the right people answer those questions and approve them. Make your payments all in the same system, whether it's a bank transfer, ACH, making an international wire, paying by a virtual card. it's all there, same simple process, no separate systems, and then reconciling that and syncing that all back into your ERP. That's what we offer. So thank you for that commercial. I want to go to the next slide here and to get some Q&A in. So I think we'll be sending out some books. We've got some good questions and some good participation today. I think one of the interesting comments we got, Brian, from the earlier questions on I don't have time, and then the comment was, well, if you got modern tools, you should have time. There's a third comment here is, why should falling behind in current technology be an acceptable alternative unless senior management is trying to hide something? So what do you think about that, Brian? Are there reasons for falling behind?
Well, there could be one that's you're out of money or out of people or whatever. You're in a bad whatever. You're just in a bad predicament right now, and in the prioritization of things, companies are going to focus on, we got to pay our employees, we got to pay our suppliers, and we got to do what we absolutely have to keep the lights on and pay the bills. And sometimes a lot of these system upgrades are viewed as discretionary things, and they get shoved to the bottom of the prioritization queue. At some point, you're going to have to pay. That fiddler has to be paid, and you're going to have to deal with it one way or the other. One of the advantages of some of the cloud-based products, and by the way, Bill.com is one of those, they automatically upgrade the software. You don't have to lift a finger. It just happens in the background for you. So, that's one of the reasons I think a lot of companies have been very interested in these multi-tenant products for some time now. And falling behind is just, let's put it this way, it's just not a very strong defense unless there's just some superseding macro issue that's impacting the company or the industry you're in.
I will add where I think I see this the most is in nonprofits, very focused on the mission, not getting a lot of support for the finance organization. Talked to someone who was coming to Bill.com for help, who was running Peachtree on a laptop in the networking closet because it had to be close to all the all the networking cables and plugged in, and it couldn't shut down, or the whole system was going to go haywire. Something that hadn't been upgraded in. I think he told me it was 20 years, right? The same old system, only 2 or 3 people were even allowed to touch this machine. And that was the only thing it was there for, was to capture the accounting. So certainly a very extreme example of falling behind, but a real one. And I think, the takeaways from this session here is, you can't fall that far behind. And Brian gave you some tools you can use to make the case for being modern and staying modern and getting that budget. And you'd be surprised at how affordable some of the more modern tools are in the cloud if you haven't been shopping around lately. So I appreciate your questions. I want to go to 2 last slides. Let's go to the next one real quick. Since I am the Bill.com guy, I would love for you to learn a little bit more about Bill.com, or at least come to us and ask some questions. If you want to trial Bill.com, it's bill.com/signup. It'll take you right to a trial. And if you want to see a demo, forget about trying it out, let somebody else show you. That's bill.com/midmarket demo. So a couple of things you can do right now if you want to learn more. One more slide, which I think is our last one, and it's just our opportunity to say thank you. Thank you for your questions, your participation, being part of these polling questions. Brian, I want to thank you as well for your great advice and input to the audience. And I want to thank the Controllers Council for the opportunity to present to all of you today. Have a great day, and thanks once again.